Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for my second video in my series, One Stamp, 4 Designs, 4 Mediums. Last week I used Copic markers. This week I'm going to be using Chalkola markers, and this is the stamp set I'm using. It's called Spring Flowers by Simon Says Stamp. And here is the finished card that I'll be making. So here is the stamp set. It's got a lot of really pretty flowers in it, and it's pretty easy to color. And I'm going to be using Chalkola, as I mentioned. These are liquid chalk markers. They are water soluble, and they're opaque and permanent on paper. So they're really great for black cardstock. You can see the tip here. It looks like a paint pen. You shake it up. It's got a ball in it so you could hear it shaking around. And then you kind of press down the tip to get the liquid coming out of the pen. I'm going to start with some black Stampin' Up! Cardstock. I'm going to use my Embossing Buddy, which is an anti-static tool made by Stampin' Up! And I'll just make sure that I don't get embossing powder where I don't want it. And I'm going to stamp my flowers using some Versamark ink. And I have a piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch. That's the size of my cardstock right now. But I'm going to trim it back later after I stamp my flowers. So I stamped the flower and I put some powder on it so I could see what I stamped. And then I stamped the stem and put some powder on it. And now I'm going to heat set both of those. And then I can figure out where I want my next flower to go. I decided to take the short stem and have it come off of this leaf here, which looks a little odd, but I'm going to put my sentiment over it so you're not really going to tell. I wanted to use a stem that was going in the opposite direction, and so that was kind of my best option here. So now I've got a different flower that I stamped on top of that. And now it's time to color. So I'm going to be using pink and this bright orange, and I'm going to combine those two with white, and then I have some green for my leaf and the stems. I'm going to be using some Q-tips to blend my colors together. And the first thing you want to do with these markers, especially if you haven't used them in a while, is really shake them up thoroughly and then test them on a piece of cardstock. You can see I'm pressing down the tip to get that paint. It's really kind of like a chalk paint flowing out of the pen. And once I get that done, I can move on to my white because I'm going to be using both of these on the same flower. So just make sure that I've got a nice good flow of the liquid. I'm going to try to work pretty quickly here. So I'm going to take my orange and I'm going to color the bottom portion of these petals. And when I do the next one, I'm going to do one petal at a time, which I think works better than trying to do them all at the same time. But anyway, so I'm going to take my orange, I'm going to go about halfway up, and you can see it comes out pretty thick. And I'm not worried about covering up my embossed areas because I can wipe the paint off of that. And then I'll take my white and I'm going to color the top half of these petals. I'm not going to overlap my colors, although you can, because even if I get some orange on the tip here, I can just color it on a piece of scratch paper and it'll come off the tip. So it's really not that big of a deal. But I'm just going to put them right up next to each other and take my Q-tip and just sort of blend them together. Now, when I did this flower, my first one, I blended the colors all the way basically to the edge, to the top of the white, and I sort of fixed that when I did my next one. So this was sort of my practice run. So the Q-tip is pretty large, but it doesn't seem to be an issue with getting these colors blended. But you can see it does fade them out a little bit. You can layer the color, which is nice, so you can get a more solid color by putting multiple layers on. Now I'm blending this with a Q-tip because it's cheap and it's easy. You could use those kind of stump thingies, but I felt like I had to continue using fresh Q-tips because they would get chalk on them and then it would come off when I would go to do a new area. So that's the reason why I'm using a Q-tip. So I'm just kind of going back and forth here with the different colors, and you can also see that I have wiped away the orange from the white embossed area, and now it looks pretty clean. So finally I'm going to add some more white at the tip, and this is sort of when I figured out that I really wanted it to be bright white at the tip. So I just put a lot of extra chalk at the top there, and then I'm going to take a fresh Q-tip and I'm going to kind of blend it down a little bit, but I'm not going to go all the way to the top, and that'll give it that little pop of color at the very top with a really bright white. And so that's sort of the technique that I ended up really liking, and I applied that on the next flower. So now I'm ready to move on to my pink flower. You can see I've done a little test run on my scratch sheet to the right there. And I'm going to speed this up a little bit more because I'm doing basically the same thing I did on the orange flower. So I'm going to color halfway up And then I'll take my white and color the top half. And in this case, I actually got really, really close with the colors and almost overlapped just a tiny little bit. And then I focused really on blending the line of these two colors, so where the two colors meet. And I think if you focus your Q-tip blending on the line between these two colors, you'll get a much nicer blend and it won't fade as much into the black cardstock. And then of course you'll also get some really bright pink at the bottom and some bright white at the top. So you can see also as I get my Q-tip close to the base, I'm removing the liquid chalk from the embossed area. So it's a nice, clean, crisp white color. So I'm just going to keep doing this here until I finish all my flowers. And remember, if you remember when I used the Copic markers, I colored the dotted petals first as their own individual petals, and then I colored the other ones. And here I'm just sort of coloring the whole thing. And that worked okay with me with the orange one, but with this particular one, I thought it would look a little bit better if I had a little bit more dimension behind that kind of dotted flower in the middle. So when I'm done here with these flowers, I'm going to take the pink and I'm going to add a little bit above the dotted area, and that it looks like it's sort of casting a little bit of a shadow. You get a little bit pink behind there, and then I'll add a little bit more white because I had blended it a little bit too much. Now I got a little bit out of the lines here, and I'll show you in a minute how to take care of that. So finally I'm going to go in here. These are really small areas and this tip is pretty thick, so I'm being really careful to stay in the lines here, and I'm overlapping quite a bit because the area is so small with the white, but it's no big deal. I just blended it in with this Q-tip and actually looked really pretty. I didn't have to do too much blending. These little stems that are very thin, it was a little tricky, and I ended up coloring over the white embossed area just because the tip was pretty thick. But I took my Q-tip and I sort of drew down the stem in the same shape as the stem, and you can see that it wiped away the chalk from the embossed area, and it looked like a really nice pretty stem that was filled in with green. So now that I'm done with those, I'm going to show you how I remove some of this area that I got over the line. And all you need is a damp tissue, and to be honest with you, I just put my tongue on it and then I put it down on the cardstock, and you can see it wiped it away. They're water soluble, so it's easy to do that. This Happy and Smile set by Simon Says Stamp is one of my go-to sets. It's got a lot of really nice sentiments in it that are perfect and simple. So I stamped this on some white cardstock, and I want to show you how I usually cut my small sentiments. I don't use my big trimmer. I use this small Fiskars trimmer. And you can see it's got a wire down the center where you're cutting, and my wire's all kind of messed up and bent, but I get the general idea of where it's going to cut. And so I'm able to see exactly where my blade's going to be, and so I line up that wire with the same distance from the word as it is from the top. Anyway, so I wanted to add a little bit more greenery for that pink flower, so I figured out where my sentiment was going to go, and then I just stamped the leaf so that it would be a little bit behind there, and then I'll put some white embossing powder on it. I'll heat it to set it, and then I'm going to go back in there with my green Chalkola pen and do the same thing. I'm just going to whip through this pretty quickly. So I've got green and white. I'm going to color these leaves the same way I colored the flowers. And now that I have my technique down where I do the color on the bottom, the white on the top, and then I just take a Q-tip to kind of generally go over the line between the two colors, it goes by really quickly, and I think it looks really good. So I'm doing this last leaf even though I don't think it even shows, but you might as well be safe than sorry. Okay, so now that coloring is done, I'm done with all my Chalkola coloring, and I'm going to finish off the card. I cut it to about 3 1/4 by 4 1/4. I just really cut it so that the flowers would be about all there was to this panel. And I'm going to ATG tape runner it to a A2 size folded card. And I want to do something a little different. I'm taking my Micron 03 pen, and I'm going to draw a line around this. These are the pens that I use for my Zentangle. There's a set that has a 01, a 03, and a 05. So this is the medium point. And I'm going to draw a line, but I'm going to make it purposely squiggly. So I'm not trying to draw a straight line. I do want it to be a little bit interesting, so not totally straight. And it's actually kind of hard to draw a squiggly line without getting out of control. So I'm trying to do this really carefully. And I'm kind of rounding the corners. And so you notice that I started in the lower right-hand corner rather than the top, and I did that on purpose because if I mess up, you're less likely to see it at the bottom than you are at the top. So I always start on the bottom part. So you can see I'm drawing lines now, and they're curved. So I'm drawing kind of, they're not quite C's, but it looks like it's kind of a tube, and that's the look you get when you curve these lines. And you could leave it like this if you want, or you could color them in, and that's what I chose to do. So I'm going to go around this whole circle and color, or not circle, but rectangle, and I'm going to color all these different lines in. And I thought this gave me a really cool hand-drawn sort of look for a frame around this flower bouquet. This stamp set also has a tiny little birthday sentiment. I was really shocked at how clear it's stamped and embossed, so you could see this little tiny happy birthday. And I'm gonna go back to that same trimmer and show you how I cut the sentiment. And it's easier if you have something to hold on to with your other hand while you cut this, and that way it'll hold it into place. But you can see I keep lifting it up to make sure that my wire is the same distance from the sentiment as the top of my cardstock. And so I get a nice even look. So I'm going to put my happy right near those leaves so I cover up the area where the stem hit the leaf. And then for my birthday, I'm just going to cut a tiny little banner. I just cut up the center of the cardstock and about maybe like 1/8 of an inch, and then I cut from each corner to that line in the middle. And so I'm going to take my Zig two-way glue pen because this is really, really tiny. I should put some glue on the back here, and I'll take my tweezers to place it right there underneath the happy birthday. And it's extending out past my black cardstock just to be a little bit different so it stands out. And that is the card for today. So I hope you enjoyed seeing those Chalkola markers. I did do a more thorough evaluation of them on a different card, and you can see the link to that in the blog post. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that second card, and I will be back next time with the third one. See you then.